पेमेंट फेल।
पेमेंट फेल? लेकिन पैसे तो कट गए।
गई मेरी मेहनत की कमाई।
हो जाएगी भरपाई, चिंता मत कर मेरे भाई। अगर डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शन फेल हो जाए और अकाउंट से पैसे कट जाए तो बैंक समय से पैसे लौटा देगा, वरना कॉम्पनसेशन का है प्रावधान। नहीं तो आरबीआई के ओम्बुड्समैन को शिकायत करें आप।
योर बिल।
मेरी फीस। आरबीआई कहता है
जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Hello and welcome. It is 7:30 in the evening in India and we are back again with a spotlight on G20. On the show today, we look at how India's G20 presidency can accelerate attainment of sustainable development goals. The 17 goals that all UN member states adopted in 2015. In the first development working group meeting under India's G20 presidency in December, the focus was on data for development because data is a major basis for decision making. And in the current scenario, data is playing a vital role in all aspects, agriculture, food security and more across nations. For instance, data is helping predict climate patterns through research and development and helps target aid interventions to vulnerable groups. Also, new sources of data such as satellite data can better measure progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. While this approach can help in identifying development challenges, the focus also is on building innovative solutions to address the challenges through partnerships. This has been India's approach as G20 president so far, but the challenge vis-a-vis achievement of 17 SDGs by 2030 is still a humongous one. On India at G20 today, we ask how can India come good on that challenge during its G20 presidency. I'm Manman Bhattacharya. First up, the top stories. On the eve of the first G20, finance ministers and central bank governors and second G20 finance and central bank deputies meetings in Bengaluru, India's Economic Affairs Secretary and Chief Economic Advisor say participants will discuss finding lasting solutions to debt problems faced by distressed economies, finding a consensus on cryptocurrencies, reform of multilateral development banks, international taxation and securing adequate finance to combat climate change. And the Youth 20 Engagement Group of G20 brainstorming session on shared future, youth and democracy and governance to be organized in New Delhi tomorrow. Brainstorming to take place on Digital India, student-centric governance and policy sector, entrepreneurs from Delhi NCR region and alumni from overseas pursuing higher education expected to participate. As chair of G20 and ahead of the Sustainable Development Goals Summit later this year in New York, India's permanent mission to the United Nations is set to host roundtables over the next few months at the UN headquarters. Roundtables to focus on sustainable lifestyles, technology-enabled social and economic advancement and skill development, among others. The next report that we will bring to you will take you through India's approach, performance and leadership on the issue of attainment of Sustainable Development Goals, which is being dealt with by the G20 Development Working Group, whose first meeting was held in Mumbai in December. The SDGs are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate change, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions and partnerships for the goal.
The road to fighting climate change is through climate justice. At the root of climate justice is the principle of being large-hearted. Climate justice is also about thinking of the bigger and long-term picture. The sad reality is changes in the environment and natural disasters impact the poor the most. Climate justice is inspired by a vision of trusteeship where growth comes with greater compassion to the poorest. Climate justice also means giving the developing countries enough space to grow. When each and every one of us understands our individual and collective duties, climate justice will be achieved. Often discussions on sustainability become too focused on green energy. But green energy is only the means. The destination we seek is a greener planet.
PM Modi presenting India's vision for sustainable development at the World Sustainable Development Summit in February 2021. India has been making remarkable progress at home on several of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by all the UN member states in 2015 with the goal of attaining them by 2030. For instance, India is recording impressive scores on SDG 6 of clean water and sanitation, driven mainly by initiatives such as the Swachh Bharat Mission. SDG 7 of affordable and clean energy, owing to expanded access to clean cooking fuel and a wide-ranging electrification drive by the government. And on SDG 9 or industrial innovation and infrastructure, due to a marked improvement in rural road connectivity and increased mobile phone penetration. Improvement has also been seen in SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, driven mainly by better access to housing through the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and the adoption of door-to-door waste collection and processing. While such progress gives hope, more needs to be done, especially in certain areas such as health, poverty, hunger, gender and climate change. In India, Niti Aayog tracks progress being made across the country on the SDGs. Niti Aayog has constructed the SDG India Index spanning across 13 out of 17 SDGs. The index tracks the progress of all the states and union territories on a set of 62 national indicators, measuring their progress on the outcomes of the interventions and schemes of the Government of India and their progress towards the SDGs for 2030. The SDG India Index is intended to provide a holistic view on the social, economic and environmental status of the country and its states and union territories, and has been designed to help leaders and change makers evaluate the performance on social, economic and environmental parameters. Having assumed the presidency of G20 for 2023, India has put the development needs and concerns of the developing world firmly at the center of the G20 discourse and has won the support of its peers in the G20 and the Global South for the same.
Despite the challenges the developing world faces, I remain optimistic that for time is coming and our time is coming. The need of the hour is to identify simple, scalable and sustainable solutions that can transform our societies and economies. With such an approach, we shall overcome the difficult challenges, whether it is poverty, universal health care, or building human capacities.
But the challenges in the road to achieving the SDGs are plenty. One of the reports that has brought out the challenges comprehensively is the 2022 Goalkeepers Report by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The report points to how the world is not on track to achieving them because of the consequences of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the COVID-19 pandemic, and reverses to human and basic rights in countries such as Afghanistan and even the United States, where abortion rights of women have got a blow. with India pitching for simple, scalable and sustainable solutions that can transform societies and economies and overcome the difficult challenges, India's intent is clear. The need now is for collective and persistent action across countries, which the G20 forum can enable. Bureau Report, DD India.
And even beyond the realm of G20, India is showing leadership on the issue of sustainable development goals. Here's what India is doing at the United Nations.
As chair of the G20 and ahead of the Sustainable Development Goals Summit this year in New York, India's permanent mission to the United Nations is set to host roundtables at the United Nations headquarters over the next few months. On Thursday, a roundtable titled Gandhi and Trusteeship, a panel discussion on sustainable lifestyles and enduring peace will be held. Next, on the 9th of March, a roundtable on a world we women and girls want, technology-enabled social and economic advancement is scheduled. On the 16th of March, a roundtable on grassroots leadership and transformation, charting the path of empowerment through technology and skill development will be taking place. And on the 14th of April, a special event commemorating the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a visionary leader who was the chief architect of India's constitution, is planned. India at the United Nations tweeted on Monday, focus will be on India's growth story and achievements and how these might be scaled for the potential benefit of the global south. In mid-February, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, accepted the chairship of the Commission for Social Development at the UN headquarters.
The Commission plays a critical role in intensifying global dialogue on social development issues and in strengthening international cooperation to achieve the SDGs, particularly related to inclusive social development. Madam Chair, looking ahead, and as we all know, the priority theme of the next session is fostering social development and social justice through social policies to accelerate progress on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to achieve the overarching goal of poverty eradication. The theme underlines an intrinsic and important connection between social development and social justice as fundamentals to achieving the SDGs.
The 2023 SDG Summit will be convened in September 2023 during the United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week. For the summit, heads of state and government will gather agenda and will be only the second such SDG summit since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda in September 2015. Since the SDG summit will be preceded by the G20 summit in New Delhi, the onus lies on India's G20 presidency to brainstorm on ways to accelerate progress on SDGs before world leaders do a mid-term appraisal of the progress made towards sustainable development over the last 8 years before moving to the next phase of implementation. Bureau Report, DD India.
And we are now joined by Ms. Suruchi. She is Director of TERI, which is the Energy and Resources Institute, a non-for-profit policy research organization headquartered in New Delhi. TERI will be organizing, remember, the World Sustainable Development Summit 2023 from 22nd to 24th February in New Delhi. And the summit deliberations will focus on mainstreaming sustainable development and climate resilience for collective action. Ms. Suruchi, welcome to India at G20. Let's begin straight away with India's focus on data for development. Do you think that that makes a sound basis for attainment of sustainable development goals, having the right data and then leverage that data for development?
Thank you for the opportunity, and first and foremost I would like to say India is proud to host the presidency of the G20 this year. And I think for each Indian, it's a privilege and a moment of being proud that, we are hosting the event in September this year. A great opportunity for many of us to be part of it and, of course, contribute to the discussion. TERI's been a pioneer with regard to discussion related to sustainable development issues. And when we talk about what we want to do with regard to sustainability, I think a lot is to do with the data and the quality of the data that we have that is assessed, basis which decisions are basically taken on different fronts. Whether we're talking about the agriculture sector or the health sector, zero hunger, reducing poverty, etc. A lot at the back end is based on the data that we have and how we analyze that data to be able to see where the recommendations can be given and where the action needs to be focused. And therefore, data for development definitely is central to the whole discussion that possibly we have with regard to sustainable development and achieving the sustainable development goals.
So then is the G20 summit an opportunity or a platform for not just the G20 member nations but also members of the Global South to look at more innovative ways of collection of data for the sake of precision, for instance, using satellite data, using new technologies, using artificial intelligence. I was reading about how the United Nations Development Programme or UNDP has entered into a partnership with Telangana for climate resilient agriculture, using data which is taken in through AI and using that for development purposes.
Yeah. So there are different kinds of data sets that we basically use in research and analysis. One is the observed data that possibly different departments record on a year-to-year basis for different locations. The finer the resolution at which the data is collected, the better is your analysis with regard to what you can say. There are models that are used for simulating the data into future years, or maybe, depending on the nature of the data, providing projections. Then there is AI, which is now being used, which can also help in terms of data interpretation and analysis. And then, of course, there are, primary level, there is primary level data collection that also happens at the field. So while you have, secondary level data that is collected by departments, there's primary level data that is also collected by organizations for such kind of analysis, where we do our own surveys, interact with different organizations, communities, etc., using various tools to also develop the data where there are gaps. Because in many cases, it could be the case that this data is not available as it is in the form in which you want to be able to, to analyze the information to be able to give the right recommendation. And therefore, that is the place where possibly we carry out surveys, use different tools, and enrich the data sets using different methods. And of course, satellite imagery and spatial data becomes another source of data that is used extensively for the analysis that we do across different sectors. It touches on all development sectors, and therefore there are different ways in which data can be collected, analyzed, and interpreted for the kind of decision making that is needed with regard to the development goals.
So one part of the approach as far as attainment of sustainable development goals is concerned is identifying the problem for which data sets would come handy. But then what do you do to deal with the problem? And India, besides data for development, is also emphasizing on the need for partnerships to come up with simple, scalable and sustainable solutions. How do you look at this focus of India, and how can the G20 countries and members of the Global South join hands for such solutions? Because you need a whole lot of innovative solutions to attain these 17 sustainable development goals around the world. Ms. Suruchi?
If you look at the countries, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you look at the G20 countries, it's quite a spread of countries there where you have a mix of developed and developing countries, emerging economies, the kind of mix that we have in the G20. So while there may be political and economic differences across the countries, the group of countries that we are, possibly there are huge opportunities in terms of collective efforts and partnerships that countries can look at with regard to sharing of information and knowledge, which may basically help other countries in terms of structuring themselves and implementation with regard to the development goals. So there is great opportunity that is there within the G20 countries with regard to information and knowledge sharing that can be encouraged. This includes data platforms, data portals that can basically be set up where there is information and knowledge exchange within the countries, which can actually help many countries who may not be as developed, I would say, in terms of sharing information and knowledge and having access to platforms and portals where data can be shared, I think as an opportunity to create in the other countries within the G20. So yes, there is a lot of opportunity in terms of sharing and knowledge creation and generation amongst the G20 countries that can also happen with regard to data sharing and information generation.
We are in the midterm of the cycle of the Sustainable Development Goals. 8 years have passed, another 8 or 7 years still remain for 2030. Now, having said that, India, the United Nations will be hosting roundtables, which will be basically brainstorming sessions ahead of the Sustainable Development Summit in September on the sidelines of the UNGA. The focus is going to be on women-led development, on sustainable lifestyles, on use of technology for overall socio-economic empowerment, etc. So, how do you look at that focus, because that extends beyond the realm of G20, but has to be complementary?
Yeah, so I think many of these multilateral platforms that you have, whether it's the G20 or the discussion, the UN General Assembly, which is going to basically touch on the Sustainable Development Goals, but a large focus of the UN General Assembly is also on the climate discourse, discussions that are happening on the climate negotiations. So ideally, if you were to see, each of these multilateral processes that we have in place and the discussions that are happening in these multilateral platforms somewhere do connect to the global goals that we have set for ourselves with regard to the SDGs or with regard to climate action. And therefore, these platforms become very important because again and again, I think countries need to convene, stakeholders need to convene to put the agenda back on the table. And therefore, even if we have these multiple platforms in the year and we have a focus on similar issues that are being discussed, I think that is needed because the emphasis on the issues that we are basically talking about with regard to when we focus on SDGs, it's all about development, it's all about people, and it's all about how we are likely to get affected, and therefore what we need to do, and therefore needs to be a central focus for any country, whether it is a developed country or a developing country like India.
And through the Sustainable Development Summit that Terry will be hosting starting tomorrow, will the focus be to take this discourse forward on attainment of SDGs?
Yeah, definitely. The World Sustainable Development Summit, which starts tomorrow, basically has a big focus on the G20 and the G20 leadership for green development. There are sessions which are going to focus on the resilience aspect with regard to making sure that we are able to respond effectively to the risks of climate change and the vulnerabilities related to it. So the focus of the World Sustainable Development Summit is quite widespread, starting from looking at what we should be discussing and taking forward in the G20 discussions and discourse, to the leadership that is needed by the G20 countries to take that agenda forward, to the agenda with regard to building climate resilience.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Ms. Suruchi, for joining us with your views. Ahead of the first Finance Minister and Central Bank Governors and second meeting of their deputies in Bengaluru, Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, Ajay Seth, said that a wide range of discussions will be held in the upcoming meeting. He added that discussions will be held on economic growth and ways to manage inflation.
We expect that the ministers and governors would be discussing a wide range of issues, beginning with the macroeconomy. As we are all aware that the tough conditions at the macroeconomic level have somewhat eased in the recent months, but overall environment continues to be very tough. The inflation rates are high. In that situation, the coordination among major economies is vital, and we expect that that will form a major part of the discussion.
Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageshwaran said that G20 finance ministers and central bank governors will discuss debt troubles in developing economies, cryptocurrencies and global inflationary pressures at the first meeting later this week.
when we talk of preparing the international institutions for the 21st century challenges. Multilateral Development Bank reform figures on top of the agenda, and they need to evolve to address challenges at the global level. At the same time, many of the global level challenges also need countries at the internal level to be strengthened. So continuing with the country level engagement and preparing themselves to address global level challenges is an important priority for multilateral development bank themselves, and therefore what this community of G20 nations can do to help them, to facilitate it, etc., are the issues on the table.
And a Youth 20 engagement group of G20 brainstorming session on shared future, youth and democracy and governance is going to be organized in New Delhi on Wednesday in an attempt to highlight the power of youth in areas of democracy and governance. Office of International Programs, Shri Ram College of Commerce is conducting a brainstorming workshop in association with the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. The three main topics of the brainstorming workshop will be Digital India, student-centric governance and policy sector. So that's coming up on Wednesday. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Thanks for watching.
दीदी नौकरी लग गई।
अरे वाह, बधाई हो। तो अब तो ढेर सारी शॉपिंग।
हाँ दी, नया मोबाइल।
अरे रुको शहजादे, सैलरी से पहले खर्चे।
इंस्टेंट लोन भी तो मिलता है।
पहले बजट बनाना सीखो, फिर खर्च करो।
पर दी,
देखो, कमाई का एक हिस्सा हमेशा बचाना चाहिए, लेकिन पार्टी देने से नहीं बचोगे तुम।
हाँ दी, पार्टी मेरी, बजट तुम्हारा।
अच्छा।
आरबीआई कहता है,
सही वित्तीय बर्ताव करे आपका बचाव।
This is DD Dialogue amidst very challenging global economic environment. We time and again hear how India has emerged as a shining spot. Now, what does that really mean and what does that really imply? The manner in which the union budget capitalizes on the opportunities that are there for the Indian economy. Those are the themes that we'll be talking further. My name is Shubhendu Ghosh. We'll be talking about the aspects from the industry and finance perspective in particular, but also look at the broad opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for Indian economy. Let me introduce you to our eminent panel of guests who are joining us today. Mr. Robin Banerjee, Vice Chairman, CII, Maharashtra State Council. He brings with him rich experience from industry, ex-banker, eminent chartered accountant. Mr. Arijit Basu, Chairman, IMC Banking, NBFC and Finance Committee. Eminent professional from banking, financial services industries, ex-board member and Managing Director of SBI. Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor, SBI. Eminent economist, notable work in designing programs such as PM Kisan, ECLG scheme for MSME and much more. And finally, we have with us Dr. Tirthankar Patnaik, Chief Economist with NSE India. Eminent economist, rich experience he brings with him in Indian capital markets, macro and sector strategy and quantitative finance and consumer banking and much more. May I request you all to put your hands together once more for our eminent panel of guests present here. So since we are talking in the context of the union budget, why don't we open this conversation first, taking the broad views, the opening thoughts of each of our eminent panelists about what are their key takeaways from the